Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Shattered Lives. I'm Paul Healy, Chief Reporter with the Irish Daily Star. Today our crime correspondent Michael O'Toole will be speaking to reporter Nicola Donnelly about the Drogheda feud. Nicola brings her significant expertise covering one of the most unpredictable and violent feuds in recent years, with a particular focus on the horrific murder of Keane Mulready-Woods, the reasons behind it and who carried it out.
Nicola Donnelly, how are you?
I'm good, Mick.
Right, so Nicola is an expert in two areas of journalism which are really important to the Star. One is she's one of the country's top court reporters. And the second area, which is why we have dragged Nicola on to Shattered Lives today, is she's an expert on Drogheda, particularly the Drogheda feud. Now, I have to say, before we go any further, I have to be honest, I don't know as much as I should as a crime reporter about the Drogheda feud. But Nicola is the reason why I don't know as much as I should about the Drogheda feud, because Nicola has ownership of the feud in the Star and the Mirror, and so she's the expert, and I'm quite happy, and it's a sort of relief to me that Nicola has taken over that, so I can concentrate on other stuff. And it's a real source of comfort for me that Nicola knows so much, so we never get scooped. Nicola always scoops everybody else, and it just takes the burden off me. So I'm really, really grateful for all the stuff Nicola does. So now I'm going to go on a learning journey with the listeners. So I'm going to learn as much as I can about the Drogheda feud as well as the listeners. So it's going to be interesting for me to hear the whole big story and the full background. How's that? Okay, so what we've decided to do is to focus the whole background of the Drogheda feud around one murder, and that's the murder of, everybody would know about it now, of Keane Mulready-Woods. And that obviously that the murder of the young fella and his dismemberment really shocked the nation. Now, Nicola, you've been covering the murder of Keane Mulready-Woods since day one, and the feud before that. So in recent weeks, two men were jailed as part of the Garda probe into that murder. What can you tell us about those men?
Well, Mick, firstly, we can talk about Paul Crosby, 27-year-old. He's actually one of the main protagonists in this feud on the anti-Maguire side, as we call it. He was jailed for 10 years for assisting Robbie Lawlor in the murder. Now, his role, as Gardaí saw it as, was that he phoned Keane and organised to meet him outside a shop in Drogheda. Keane met up with him, they went into the shop, Keane bought a soft drink and they came back out, and then Keane was lured then into the car that the second man, Gerard Cruz, was driving, and they drove him back to the house in Rathmullen Park where Robbie Lawlor subsequently then murdered and dismembered him. Paul, as I said, got 10 years, and Gerard Cruz, who actually wasn't on the Garda radar, has been involved in this feud. He got 7 years in jail, and he claimed to Gardaí that he actually didn't even know what was going to happen to Keane when he dropped him off at the house.
So essentially, one man lured him to his death and the other man drove him to his death. Would that be fair?
That would be fair.
Okay. And I noticed, I thought this was a really great headline the day after they were sentenced, because I don't know, was it yourself or somebody on the back bench, maybe in the Star, noticed that together their years were 17, which was how old Keane was when he was murdered.
Exactly. Yeah. That was quite an impacting. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk a bit more about the murder of Keane Mulready in a wee while, but let's go back to go forward. This was obviously part of the Drogheda feud. What is the background to the feud? Why did it erupt?
Well, Mick, the background to this feud is that basically in the town of Drogheda, Owen Maguire, he heads the Price Maguire organised crime gang along with now deceased Cornelius Price. He had a gang and, dealing with drugs and distribution of drugs, and that gang split into two divisions, and it was overselling rights in the town as well as in the Moneymore estate. There was no doubt there was probably other issues that caused the fallout, but there was a split in the gang. Now, the feud really escalated in July 2018 when Owen Maguire was shot several times by Robbie Lawlor. That happened near his home on Cement Road. Owen survived, but he remained paralysed in a wheelchair. But then following that incident, there was hundreds of incidences of assaults, attacks. There was a kidnapping. houses were being petrol bombed, suspicious devices were placed under vehicles, there was acts of intimidation, and as we know then, there's been 4 murders in this feud and several attempted murders, since then, since 2018.
And one thing that I find really interesting here, it just chimes with me from other feuds that we've covered. We've obviously in Shattered Lives have covered the Kenna and Hutch feud an awful lot. And then before that, there was what we would call the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud. Now, what's interesting there is that in the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, that was one gang that hived off into 2. Same with, like, Gary Hutch was part of the Kinahan cartel and he split off from them, and then there was the feud erupted there. So it sounds familiar in this case that it was criminals working together and then they break off. And that, for some reason, that when they do go their separate ways or they hive off, it does seem to create huge tensions, and the feuds emerge from previous friendships gone wrong.
Exactly, and that's exactly the case here. The anti-Maguire faction that we call it, because we can't name many of those involved in that side because they're before the courts on serious charges. But like, these were young lads working for Owen when they were in their teenage years. I mean, they sold drugs for Owen. They were known as corner boys, as the word they used. So I mean, when this split happened, there was, and we saw it, there was been serious hatred on both sides. I mean, one of the main protagonists who we can name is Paul Crosby, who we said earlier had been sentenced for facilitating the murder of Keane Mulready-Woods. I mean, this guy, I covered Drogheda Court for over 10 years, seen them all come through it. But this guy, there was no fear in in the anti-Maguire side. I mean, there was one day in court where I witnessed Owen Maguire's associates were in court. There was the anti-Maguire faction in court, and Crosby went up to one of Owen's associates and had a few words with him and basically laughed in his face in the courtroom before he was, like, thank God, swiftly removed from the courtroom. But later that same day, more of the anti-Maguire side sat beside Maguire's associates to intimidate them even further. I mean, it was, from a journalist point of view, I mean, this was just, surreal watching this unfold right in front of me in a courtroom.
Does it, the fact that it's a small town, I know it's the biggest town in Ireland, but it is a town, it's not a city. Does that make it more concentrated and more personal? Like, say, for example, the Kinahan Hutch feud, there were parts of North Inner City, South Inner City, and, deep south, County Dublin. So there was a wide expansive area. It seems here that it's really within a few kilometres of each other.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, like, as you say, Drogheda is a big town, but, like, there's a lot of people down there that everyone seems to know everyone. And because, it was in a concentrated area, like Moneymore Estate, where the anti-Maguire faction were based, isn't too far from Cement Road, where Maguires are based. And, it's a town where, it's quite tight-knit community as well. So, I mean, yeah, that made it more intense. And the fact that, like, most people knew each other down there. So, it was quite frightening, really.
Okay, so just again in reference to the Kinahan Hutch feud, we know that the Kinahan cartel is much bigger than the Hutch organised crime gang, okay? Would that be the same in Drogheda? Is one gang bigger than the other, or are they equal size or similar size?
It's hard to tell, really, Mick, but I would say that the Maguire side at one stage would have been a lot bigger. They would have had a lot of contacts overseas in the UK and around the country, whereas the anti-Maguire side are lads in their early 20s, mid 20s. They would have had contacts with Robbie Lawlor, who was older, and may have had some contacts with Dublin criminals as well. But in saying that, like, I mean, Gardaí have already identified over 200 people that have been involved in both sides. So, I mean, that's quite a lot of people, really. That's
an awful lot of people for such a small place. And I'm presuming that they're from they're from only certain parts of Drogheda. Really,
exactly. Yes, yeah. They would
that
be
makes it really concentrated.
Yeah, concentrated in certain estates and certain areas of the town.
Right. So, as you say, there were over 200 incidents, and it was quite serious. I remember at one stage, the Garda Commissioner Jury Harris went up and I know, remember the former chief for the Louth Division, Christy Mangan, he put in a special operation. Was it Operation Stratus?
Yes, it was Operation Stratus. Now that was implemented just after Owen Maguire was shot in 2018, and that operation actually continues today in a bid to dismantle these feuding gangs and drug gangs in the town. And you're right there, it was in 2019 when Garda Commissioner Drew Harris deployed the Garda Emergency Response Unit to the town. And this was all part of the plan to deal with these feuding gangs. And with Operation Stratus, that involved every unit in Drogheda Garda Station, from uniform Gardaí, local detective units, drug units, the Armed Support Unit, the Emergency Response Unit. Also involved with helping them out was the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the Criminal Assets Bureau. So, it was a very, very big operation.
So they poured all the assets in, and I also seem to recall that there was a disproportionate amount of recently attested new Gardaí were sent to Drogheda at one stage.
They were indeed.
They put a lot of resources in there.
Yes, huge resources went in to try and get on top of this feud, which they have. They have got on top of it, but senior Gardaí have said that the feud isn't over, but it has settled down a lot. They've a lot of people before the courts, in prison. Several have fled overseas. It has quietened down an awful lot than it was during 2019-20.
Okay, so there have been 4 murders. Now, we're going to talk about Keane Mulready-Woods and Robbie Lawlor in a wee while, but there were 2 other murders as part of this feud. Talk to me a wee bit about them.
Well, the first murder came in August 2019 up at Clogherhead Caravan Park. A lad called Keith Brannigan. Now, he wasn't involved in much of this feud. He was targeted because he was a friend of the anti-Maguire faction, the boss man there, and he was shot dead as he was laying decking, on a summer's day in August, outside the mobile home he was working on. His murder, it actually came as a huge shock, and everyone was frightened in the town over this, because he wasn't a player at all in this feud.
So he was an easy target, was he really?
An easy target, and to get, I suppose, at the anti-Maguire faction that this is what they can do.
So that would have come from the side that Crosby was part of, essentially.
Crosby was, yes.
So that side of the feud.
That side of the feud that Crosby was involved with. Keith Brannigan would have been, Crosby's boss man's friend.
Okay. No, I was in Clogherhead for that murder that day, and I can remember all murder scenes are really terrible, but it was in a caravan park, and you could see the caravan where he was shot. He was working, as you say, he was working on the deck, and you could really see it from the road, and it was quite eerie. And I also remember, it's coming back to me now, I also remember, I think there was a car was hit with a couple of bullets as well, were there?
There's a shop, there was a shop beside the caravan park. As I said, it was the height of the summer. There was families around. There was a couple of cars parked in the front car park at the shop, and I think it was 2 of those cars were hit with stray bullets. Now, there was children in the shop getting ice cream, parents, with the children and that. Anyone could have easily, any innocent person could have easily, or child could have easily been hit with a stray bullet that day. It's just completely reckless, yeah.
It brings home how callous, and you're right, how reckless it is. Because it's by the sounds of things, they let off a volley of shots. It wasn't just aimed at the poor man himself. So you're right, it could have been anybody. So what happened after that then? There was another murder, I think was it October, November that year?
It was November that year, 2019. Richie Carberry. Now he was a known drug trafficker. He worked with the anti-Maguire side. He was arriving home at his house late at night, I think it was around 11:30, and a gunman opened fire and shot him in his driveway. He was, practically pronounced dead at the scene. I think he was shot several times in the stomach area. So I mean, within August, September, October, 3 months, we had 2 murders.
Yeah, things were really heating up.
They were.
I know there've been arrests in relation to those 2 murders, but I don't think anybody's been charged in relation to anything.
There's been several arrests. There's been no charges as yet.
And this goes back many, 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 many years ago. And actually, I always remember it was March 2000. I was working for the Irish News and I was just leaving to join the Star. And one of the last big stories I did in the Irish News was to interview the Garda Commissioner, Pat Byrne. And it was about the Uma bomb, which was in 1998. And he said something to me, which has always stayed with me. He basically said, we know who carried out the Uma bomb. And he said, there's a difference between knowing something and proving it in court. So, and that's always stayed with me. So I presume that the guards have a very good handle on who was involved and why with these, but getting the proof.
Exactly, it's proving is and getting the charges is the important aspect on this.
Can we just talk about Operation Stratus again for a moment? You mentioned all the specialist units and all the Garda units, local and national, that were involved in this. Is it fair to say that, I'm not going to say they've got the upper hand, but the tide seems to have turned, and that they do seem to have got a handle on this and have seemed to have fought back against the gangs?
They have indeed. I mean, there was, as we said, there was a huge amount involved in bringing this feud under control. They have a handle on it. But as I said, Senior Gardaí have said that they don't believe the feud is actually over. But at least they know what they're dealing with and how quickly they did get it under control. Sadly, lives had been lost, but it is under control.
Right. And I remember Christy Mangan, as I said, he was the chief for Louth. He's now retired, but I remember an interview with him before he went, and he spoke about how important it was for the Gardaí, for the people of Drogheda to get to take these gangs on and to make Drogheda safe and safer for the people of Drogheda. So I just remember listening to him, and you could sense how important it was to him and to his members in the Drogheda district and the Louth division.
Oh, of course. He wanted to reassure the people of Drogheda, that they were doing everything they could to get on top of this feud and to put away behind bars the people involved and, just try and clean up the streets. Huge investment went in. I mean, a regular occurrence down there nightly was the Garda helicopter was out. There wasn't, I don't think, a night went by where the helicopter wasn't out keeping an eye on these gangs and, trying to help out as best they could with it all.
And because I remember, you mentioned the emergency response unit the year. I remember, obviously, our office is in Talbot Street, and that was the epicenter really of the feud, the Keane and Hutch feud in 2016, 2017. And I remember, you probably remember yourself, Nicola. I don't know if you were ever caught up in checkpoints by the ERU and the ASU, and I'll go all through all the alphabet, special detective unit and everything. And I can tell you, senior guards are not happy when they have armed Gardaí on the streets. They really don't like it because they're a community police force. So I presume the same thing happened up there, that there were these big checkpoints.
Yeah, I mean, one of the regular occurrences outside Drogheda District Court, court used to sit on a Friday there, I think it's changed to Mondays now, was the armed response unit sitting outside the courtroom or the courthouse every Friday morning. Now, this was because there was days where there was both sides of the feud up. There was days when there was one side up and then other days when the other side were up. But on the days when both sides were up, as I mentioned earlier about Crosby, going over to the, his rivals in the courtroom and laughing in his face. I mean, a regular occurrence was the armed support unit. And when the feud died down, in 2020, I was still covering court down in Drogheda, and you kind of look out and you go, God, there's no armed support unit today. And it came as a relief, to feel, I know, having them there was brilliant because it was security. If anything did happen, innocent people, would have been in court that weren't involved in the feud. And not seeing it there was, a relief in a way.
Wow.
It was, yeah.
And just about, you mentioned in the court, did you ever, were you ever worried for your own safety in the court?
Thankfully, no. No, that's the honest question. I don't know why. I think probably because, they probably weren't interested in targeting me, even though I was writing about them and, you know, doing the court reports on them and stories and articles for the Star as well. Thankfully, no, I wasn't fearful. There was enough guards around anyway, if there was any chance of being fearful.
Okay, that's good to hear. Right, so I mentioned there have been 4 murders and we've spoken about 2 there. I want to talk about Keane Mulready-Woods, because he really, you know, I think his murder, did, as I say, it did shock the nation, and it probably went around the world because it's certainly one of the most gruesome murders I've covered. There have been other dismemberments, but the fact that he was essentially a kid. What can you tell me about him? What is Keane's story?
Well, Keane grew up in Drogheda, as we know. He was the youngest of 5 children in a family that lived in the town. From what I know, he left school at an early age, but unfortunately, then he was groomed into this drug gang in his early teens to be a drug debt collector and an enforcer. And he went around the town and he was, you know, sporting designer clothes and riding his scrambler bikes. Now, he was involved with a lot of intimidation of people in the town. And I actually covered a court case he was involved in when he was 15. It was his bail hearing. He was up for threatening to burn a family out of their home. He subsequently got a suspended sentence for that, but like he was threatening and intimidating people who owed drugs. He worked for the Maguire side, but then he was suspected of playing both sides of the feud, which is, you know, one of the reasons why possibly Robbie Lawlor targeted him, as well as the fact that Robbie suspected him, but it was never proven that he was somewhat involved in the shooting of Richie Carby. Now, Richie Carby was Robbie Lawlor's brother-in-law. So, you know, but in the run-up to Keane's murder, like in the weeks beforehand, Gardaí actually had warned him that his life was in danger. And he so much so that he did take it seriously, because he started to wear a ballistic vest. Now, that ballistic vest was found in a bonfire shortly after his murder near the house he was killed in. They tried to destroy evidence, and his ballistic vest, along with other stuff they threw on the bonfire.
Isn't that shocking that a 17-year-old child has to wear
17 years of age,
a vest? Yeah. Mother God. And, you know, I'm just thinking, actually, it's just come to my mind. I know that Justice Minister Simon Harris is bringing in legislation. It's going to be a criminal offence to groom children,
exactly,
to be involved in crime. And that, I mean, you know, that is what it seems to me, that was what was done in this case. Somebody groomed this child to be involved in criminality.
Oh yeah, ployed him with money and, you know, designer gear, and you know, do this and we'll pay you so much money. And I mean, for a 15, 16, 17-year-old to have access to a lot of money, you know, they're easy targets.
So, and that's how essentially he was on one side and he got caught up in the feud, essentially.
Exactly. Essentially, that's the case. And as I said, Robbie Lawlor is the man that Gardaí know and believe killed him. Now, as I said, he was the reason Robbie targeted him was because of being involved or suspected of being involved in somewhat in his brother-in-law Richie Carby's murder. But as I said, that has never been proven.
So from what I remember, parts of Keane's body was killed and he was stabbed. Was he stabbed to death? Do we know?
There was implements used that came out in the sentencing hearing of Cruz and Crosby, a drill and other implements. Ah,
God love the poor child. So part of his, you know, he was dismembered and part of his body was dumped in a bag in Coolock in North Dublin, and it was found in a green area, I recall.
Yes, in Moatview.
Right, okay. And to Gardaí, as you say, 2 men are serving sentences for facilitating the murder, but the Gardaí have a good picture of what happened and who else was involved.
The Gardaí are satisfied that Robbie Lawlor actually murdered and dismembered Keane, but they do believe that there was other people involved in different aspects of the murder. Now, they have made arrests since 2020, since Keane's murder, and they are hopeful that at least 5 more people are to be charged with different aspects of the murder.
But the effectively the person they believe carried out the murder was Robbie Lawlor. I think we might talk about him because he really was a serious criminal. Not only was he a gangster, but he was a serial killer, and he was someone who was accustomed to significant violence.
Indeed he was.
And I mean, I remember after his murder, so he was shot dead in Ardoyne on the border between North and West Belfast in April 2020, and he was shot as he was coming out of a house. Now, there are people before the courts in Belfast who we're not going to go into that, but we can talk about his background. I mean, I remember after he was murdered, I did a piece in the Star saying that he was implicated in at least 5 murders, including that of young Keane. And I remember there was, which is probably significant, he was blamed for a murder in 2018 of a man called Kenneth Finn, who was killed in Coolock. And he would have been an associate of a man that we call Mr. Big, a well-known criminal in that area. But there were even, I can remember he was blamed for murders in 2010, a fella called Noel Deans. And then there was a murder in 2005 when he would have been, was he 39?
38, 39, yeah.
So, so even 2005, he would have been relatively young. So, but there's no doubt that man was a serious criminal. And before he was murdered, he had been on trial for attacking a woman and threatening to kill another woman. Now, he was acquitted of both of them, but he was, this man was no stranger to violence, and he was one of the major targets for the Garda Síochána, and every guard in Dublin would have known who he was and his fearsome reputation for violence. Now, this brings us on to something else. In a few minutes, you've got this really, I think it's quite eerie, sensational recording of Robbie Lawlor. Shortly before he was murdered, he got out of prison. As I say, he'd been on remand for attempted murder and threats to kill, but he was released from prison. And when he got out of prison, he became involved in a confrontation with a group of young kids, essentially a group of children. And people may have seen snippets of the video because it was videoed and it was recorded. And he, I can remember watching it myself. He starts scuffling with kids, and I think the children, they were teenagers, stole his gym bag. Right. Now, that's significant because there were flip-flops in the gym bag. Now, is it true that when the partial remains of Keane were found in a bag in Moatview, there were flip-flops in that bag?
There were a pair of flip-flops in the bag. And
the received wisdom is that was a message by Robbie Lawlor taunting the young kids who were involved in this altercation with him.
Exactly. The altercation, we can talk about that happened, as you said, shortly after he was released from prison and cleared of the murder attempt he was on trial for. It was late December 2019, as far as I recall, and the gang of youths, as you say, essentially kids in their early teens, teenagers, approached him and spotted him in town, and a short video was then released on social media showing them taunting Lawlor and punching him, and then telling him that this is only the start of it. And Lawlor hit back and laughed in their faces. I think on the video it shows him dropping his gym bag, which subsequently the gang stole, which contained his flip-flops and his gym gear. Now, after that incident, and the recording went out, the video went out on social media, an image emerged later of one of the gang wearing his gym gear, wearing his gym gear, holding his gym bag and wearing the pair of flip-flops, in a way to mock Lawlor and to antagonise him and get under his skin, basically.
Wow. And it obviously worked.
It obviously worked because, I mean, like, leaving the pair of flip-flops in the bag with Keane's limbs in Moatview, like, I mean, this was a deliberate and obvious sign, and to send a clear message to this gang that he was a ruthless criminal and he was not to be messed with, and that no act was too savage for him to commit, as we have seen.
Now you obtained, as I say, that this WhatsApp voice note that Lawlor made about the incident with the kids. But just before, when we're going to play this, but just can I just ask you, did Robbie Lawlor dismember Keane's body? Would you know, or is that the belief?
That's the belief. As far as I am aware that that's the guard evidence that he murdered and dismembered the body.
I just, what must it take in somebody to cut up a child? I just, it's hard to believe, really, isn't it?
Horrific. It is hard to believe, and even to this day, I still find it hard to get my head around. We've reported on the incident and the murder and the court cases and that, and it's still. I still find it hard to get it into my head that this actually did happen. It's just so horrific.
Now, we're going to play the WhatsApp. Now, it lasts about 5 minutes. I don't know how much we play. That's up to our esteemed producer, Ciaran Bradley, but we'll certainly play a good chunk of it. So we'll just play that now.
Yeah, I had to leave a voicemail. I've been talking for a minute and I hadn't even pressed the fucking... That was the end of it. It went on for about 15 minutes. Started at Lewis. About 11 young fellas, about 10 year olds now. Thumped them out over the forum, bust all them outs and battered them. And a couple of trying to grain over the top of it. Last few slaps and a few of them were terrified. Yeah, stopped screwing through the grabbers and all, and grabbing one of the lads, one of the young fellas, and I was like, oh, and grab their stuff, pick them, grab my bag, here, get your stuff, walk this way. So I walked this way. Guard and all trying to come. I could have got another fucking 12 months, like. You get me? For fuck's sake, 6 months. See things like that just happen. Anyway, I walked around the sort of jervers and yeah, come in and tell you, bang, yeah, talking loads of talk that I definitely wouldn't say to you, but putting them in the spot. And like, oh no, we didn't. I says, he's did. But no problem. So when I finished doing what I'm doing, I says, this last couple of days, I'll drop down and see us and just talking around the corner and bang. So we took the left for Nando's and the right, and a few of them went over to the fish shop there. I think they got the hardware store. I think they got blades and screwdrivers. So I said, there's a lane down there. Let's go back to this lane. So that was the last of opening the yap. And I says, I'll tell you what to do. Getting there, I was standing, bang! He says, okay, yeah, all right. And then his brother, who was already busted up, came at me left. You can see him with the blue bag. And bang! Knocked him straight out. And that's where you see me just going back. And then you see me laughing. And so I missed a step to another 10 steps back. Another fella, bang, put him on his arse. Guard came around the corner, just kept walking. And they kept walking up. But he took me bag. His gym bag. And he had me flip-flops. Brand new with the tag in them. He put a picture of us there for fair play to them, yeah. But that was at the end. Bastard caught me on the thing, so... but then I heard the rumours last night. This is what I'm saying. Robbie's in a hospital. He's battered in town. He's broke up with bottles. They stripped his clothes and he's very bad and they're waiting outside the hospital. You know all this stuff. They're kids, like they're 20, 21. It's about 11. You're walking down to Lewis and I seen one or two of them from the area and bits and pieces and I was looking at them and another fella come upstairs, Robbie Lawlor. Wait, look, wait. And I still walk. It's over here. How are you? Alright. Oh, did you yeah, I says, yeah, what are you going to do? I says, you fucking cabbage. Like, do something. There's a gang of yous fucking handicaps. Do something. He has a blade. I said, don't, because I zipped in my pockets because my phone. I says, he has a blade. I said, I don't use blades. I says, give me your hands. Come on, do something. I says, if you're going to do something, do it. Don't waste my time. So you can see him dropping their bags now and walking. And then that's where I start. Bang, bang, bang. I busted a couple of them up there. And then, yeah, I ended there. And I walked. So I went on about 15 minutes. What you see and what everybody else sees on WhatsApp, on Snapchat, whatever that's on, is the end of it. You get me? So, yeah, so watch it about 10 times and get the whole feel of it. You get me? Look at me playing with flip-flops. They took me back. I was robbed. But, dirty bastards. It was going up, take the bag back. Yeah, come here, you take cameras. They will gladly held me for a couple of hours. Charge sheet. Oh, yeah, back up in January the 6th. Yeah, and then you see how it rolls. So I just kept walking and yeah, bastards. But, that's the older brother as well. He's put his arse as well. You can see his top lip there. It's wild. I think you can, right? Still in town with there. Look at me flip-flops, the dirty bastards. Brand new, I swear to God, they're going to know colour jocks and all they were now. So they're getting some deep intel on me. So, but they felt it. Whatever he's telling them. Just moving this table, so I think I smashed it. So, whatever he's telling them all this time, brainwashing them, they felt it themselves. If they're kids, this is what I'm on about. They're children. So for me, okay, really experienced kind of fella, for me to be talking about that, it's very embarrassing. You get me? To be talking about that. But see, when someone says it to me and then gets into it, I'll put them straight. But I won't be, yeah, you see what I did yesterday, you want to see this, you know? You don't want to be that kind of fella, do you? But yeah, it is what it is. What you hear? Did you hear I was in hospital as well? Mashed up. Yeah, fucking hell. But I'd love to be on something like that, you know, the way Dom Mufla's there. And I just say fair play to you, know that. Well, look at they all know. But if you think about it, if you were so happy with the outcome yesterday, why would you feel like you have to spread that rumour? Yeah. So my phone fell. I had another phone, my phone fell. So I rang the phone back and I rang him and said, how are you keeping? On my phone, my mate's phone didn't ring mine. I said, how are you keeping? All right. I said, this is Jack. I said, no, who is it? I know by your little pansy voice. I says, you might come. How are you? Yeah, you got battered by a lot of youngsters. I says, you asked them exactly what happened. They says, yeah, dirty, filthy rat. I got off and I felt it in his body. I felt it because I stopped his rhythm and his talk, because he knows I can read people. I felt it in his body, in his chest, that he was embarrassed about the outcome of what happened. Excuse me, kids, hold on. Is it? Oh, hey, yeah.
So that was the recording that you had. I listened to it there and I listened to it earlier today. I thought it was very interesting. I thought there was a bit of false bravado about him. I think this incident with the kids clearly got under his skin.
It clearly did. But when you listen to him actually speaking about the incident, I think within the day after it, or within days after it, you know, you can hear him that he's purely like laughing it off, playing it down, and, you know, joking about that. Oh, they robbed my gym bag, and, you know, laughing how they robbed his brand new flip flops that he said still had the tag on them, and that they're just kids. You know, that he mentioned that several times, that they're just kids. So, you know, at first glance and first listen, you just think, God, you know, he's just playing this off and playing it down, and, you know, didn't think much of it. But that's, you know, completely different to what actually has happened.
And I know that you mentioned about the suspicion about the Carberry murder, but because of the flip-flops, you would think that played an element in, or the video or the incident, because I don't know if Keane was involved in the incident with Robbie Lawlor, but
I don't think that has never been proven if he has been, but as far as I'm aware, the guards don't believe he was.
Right. So even though Keane wasn't involved in that, he was still sending a message to perhaps kids of his age.
Exactly. That he was ruthless, and, as I said, like not to be messed with, and that he did this savage and absolutely horrific crime.
Oh, it's terrible. Now, as we said, two men are in prison in connection with the guard investigation over the death. Robbie Lawlor, the suspected and accepted murderer, is dead. Do you think it's likely that other people will be brought before the courts in relation to Keane's death?
In relation to the actual murder, I don't think so. But investigations are continuing. When we did hear from a senior detective during the sentence hearing of Crosby and Cruz that the investigation is ongoing, and they are identifying all the people that were involved surrounding the murder, and that they are expecting more people to be charged for their roles in the murder.
Now, I know that a couple of weeks ago, as you said, the men were jailed, and Keane's mother had a victim impact statement, which was read, I think it was by a senior Garda. A
senior detective.
Detective. Yeah, I found that very moving at the time. So, look, perhaps, you know, there will be other, as you say, there will be other cases, perhaps on the fringes or facilitating. Nicola, this has been absolutely fantastic, and it's really, I've certainly learned an awful lot from your explanation of job. But can you just do one final question? I know you touched on this earlier, that the guards believe that the feud's not dead. What do you think is next in the feud? Is it going to continue? Does it have the capacity to explode at any time?
Well, with a lot of feud members behind bars at the moment, several have fled overseas, as we have said. You know, it doesn't. Those involved initially seem to have, you know, as I said, either in prison or fled overseas. But, you know, there is other people coming in to take over on their patches and take over the feud. So, I mean, still could explode. It still could build, because, you know, there's others coming along that would have known both sides and, you know, are involved and continue to be involved. So it's anyone's guess. Like, I mean, the guards, as I said, are on top of it and are monitoring it and continue to, and their Operation Stratus is ongoing. You know, that's staying there for a long time.
And obviously the other big incident, which we haven't really touched on, which we can now, the death of Cornelius Price, because Cornelius Price was a senior figure in the feud, and he died over in Wales.
He did. He died a week and a half ago in Wales from a brain disease he contracted about a year and a half ago. Cornelius Price was head of the Price Maguire organised crime gang along with Owen Maguire. Now, the background to where these two came along was it actually goes back to 2006. There were two local drug dealers in Drogheda, a lad called Paul Ray and a Roy Coddington. Now, they were the ones that were major players. They were the major players in the distribution of drugs in the town at that time. Now, both of them, within a year of each other, 2006 and 2007, were murdered. Now, the Gardaí don't believe that Owen Maguire or Cornelius had a role in their murder at all. But it was after those two murders that Owen Maguire linked up then with Cornelius Price and took over the drugs trade. And they formed the Price Maguire organised crime gang. So, I mean, that's going back a long, long time, 2006.
I covered both those murders.
Wow, that's a long time ago, Mick.
I remember them very well. I think I remember there was a suspicion. Well, I think with Roy Coddington, I think there was a suspicion that a hitman who may have killed around 10 people, including people over in Spain, was involved in that. And then Paul Ray, I think Paul Ray was a victim of Eamon the Don Dunn.
I think so. I think you're right there.
I remember doing that. So, but that wasn't yet. That was a long time ago. But I remember one was. One, it was Mornington, was he killed around that area?
Yeah, Roy Coddington in Mornington. I think
Mornington
he was
Beach.
On the beach. Yeah, the beach. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it well. I remember speaking to a member of Paul Ray's family after the murder as well. Just, you know, two more victims, you know, whatever.
Exactly.
They were both victims. So, Nicola, it's been absolutely fantastic. I feel as if I've learned an awful lot, and hopefully our readers will as well. And thanks for all the great reporting. It's been really fantastic.
Thanks, Mick.